Nothing is really quite like the Boundary Waters.
There's 1,200 miles of interconnected waterways, 2,000 campsites. It's a place where you can dip a cup in the middle of the lake and drink from it without filtering the water.
You know those satellite images that show the Earth at night? Right in the heart of North America is a dark space, the heart of the continent. That is the Boundary Waters. It was March 14th, 1977. I remember that day. I said, I think I've died and gone to heaven.
It was my first time in the Boundary Waters. It was honestly the best trip I've ever taken in my entire life.
We were on our first canoe trip on Hegman Lake and just fell in love with the Boundary Waters and kind of love at first sight between me and the Boundary Waters and Nancy and I, both at the same time.
As a dad who told me after that week in the wilderness, he talked more to his son in 5 days than he probably talked to him in the last 5 years.
I had a friend whose wife was dying up there a number of years ago, and they'd lived near the Boundary Waters most of their life. And she said, very near the end, she said, "Take me over to Lake One and paddle me along the shoreline." That's all she wanted. That's what she wanted, and it was probably her last outing. And that's what it does to you.
Passion that people have when you bring up the Boundary Waters. You don't even have to talk about, the extent of the risks and the science. You talk about their love of the place. It's a magical connection like almost no other. Because when you're on your own, you're truly on your own and immersed in that wilderness, there just aren't other experiences like that.
A loss this great, this total within our control. I mean, how can we even be talking about doing it?
The Boundary Waters is at great risk. The risk is in the form of a proposed mining district. There are a number of proposals to develop sulfide ore copper mining all around the edge of the Boundary Waters. Our concern is about this type of mining in this location.
This is not the same kind of mining that's been done elsewhere in our state.
Sulfide ore mining is fundamentally different than iron ore mining, because in breaking this particular kind of rock open in this way, we release acid mine drainage.
Acid mine drainage is toxic to water. It ends up damaging, destroying, killing aquatic plants, fisheries, and is harmful to human beings. The problem with mining in the watershed is all of our interconnected water. It is impossible to keep water pollution on mines that are adjacent to the wilderness out of the wilderness. We can look at the performance of mines, modern copper mines, and what we find is that every modern copper mine in America about which we have data has polluted water.
This would be about the worst place in the world to put a mine like this. It's such a water-rich place, it's going to go further and faster.
I've done extensive reading on the effects of hazardous materials spill and what that would mean for the forest downstream. Just about every critter would be affected. Otters would lose their food supply. Deer and moose, they couldn't survive. And if the deer and moose are gone, then the wolves are gone. The impact would be phenomenal and would take centuries to thousands of years to recover.
The World Health Organization lists the 10 environmental toxins of greatest concern to human health. And sulfide ore copper nickel mining releases 5 or 6 of these. These are toxins that have deleterious effects in a lot of different arenas: neurodevelopmental disorders, cancer potential.
That's why we have so many physicians that are crying out and saying, listen to us. We're asking, please look at the health impact.
Every single one of these mines have leaked. We do not have the technology to make it safe. We do not need it. It's not a national emergency. But what will be a national emergency is if we destroy drinking water for this generation and for coming generations.
putting a sulfide ore copper mine in the headwaters of waters that flow into the wilderness is wrong. This is simply the wrong place. My grandfather was a miner. We're not anti-mining. Mining is appropriate in the right place. The key is to understand that we can make that choice, that we can choose where we want to allow industrial mining and where not. And there is no necessity or critical need or urgency for it to happen here. The legacy of a copper mine in the watershed of the Boundary Waters would be risks and damage that'll continue for hundreds and hundreds of years, whereas the life of a mine would be about 20 years. So the argument for a mine in the watershed of the Boundary Waters is jobs. But if you really look at the quality studies done on a jobs analysis, you'll find that for every job that a mining company might promise, we're likely to lose 10 jobs.
It makes total sense that you want to have a nice job that pays well. The downside of that job is the technologies they're relying on to protect the boundary waters. It's going to fail. It's not going to last forever.
For this mining company to tell us that they have the technology to do it safely? Absolutely not. Then why isn't it being done safely anywhere else in the world? The other thing with mining these days, it's all automated. It's not going to bring volumes of jobs to the area. So we have to say no. There's a better way to continue to remain healthy and growing economically in the northeast region of Minnesota.
The Boundary Waters 100% drives my business and my livelihood. There's just so much more to it than if wilderness is wrecked with this sort of a mine. If you take away what makes it so special, we lose the reason we all live here.
You can't have the same wilderness character that exists within the Boundary Waters now and the mine. One has to give.
The worst case scenario with this mine is probably the inevitable scenario. I think we're going to see a decimation of the current economy that's there, the place-based economy. People are going to go elsewhere. And I think we're going to be scratching our heads years from now and saying, how did we let this happen? How could we have done this? How could we have taken this iconic place and ruined it? So Antofagasta, the Chilean company that owns Twin Metals, they have just an abysmal track record. Their own country has taken significant sanctions against them. One thing that baffles me is that if we were building any other kind of a major infrastructure project in Minnesota, we'd be asking, can we trust them? What's their track record? This isn't the company that I think Minnesotans would want coming in here and controlling the actions on something that's going to need to be managed for centuries. It's crazy.
I had an experience going out to a drill site, and I did ask the geologist from Antofagasta, you have children the same age as I have. Can you honestly, in your heart, tell me not to worry? Then he said, I would be concerned if I were you. So why are we taking the risk?
The motive is totally greed. It's totally, how can I take these public resources, things that belong to everybody, squeeze them out and put money in my pocket. These minerals now belong to you and me, but we're going to give them to a Chilean company. We're going to give these resources to a Chilean company that's going to process them in a Chinese factory that then we are going to be presumably purchasing those back from.
Why in heaven's name should we sacrifice the Boundary Waters to enrich Chilean investors in Antofagasta? It makes no sense.
In 2016, the Forest Service concluded, after examining the science for a couple of years, that this was the wrong place for a copper mine. Unfortunately, under President Trump, politics has intervened.
You know, just a month after visiting Minnesota in April of 2019, the Trump administration renewed the leases for Twin Metals behind closed doors, and you have to ask yourself why. Why do this away from the public eye? Well, it could have something to do with Twin Metals being controlled, being wholly owned by Antofagasta, a Chilean mining conglomerate, which is controlled by Andronico Luksic and the Luksic family. That family, in January of 2016, bought a $5 million mansion in Washington, D.C., and just days later, they rented out to presidential advisors, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. So you see something like that, you have to ask the question, is this administration really looking at the science, or is there something else going on here?
We wanted to do a study of the boundary waters. We know these mines tend to leak. They all do eventually. And what impact would that have? All of a sudden to find out that leases are being offered, the study's being pulled back. To this day, I have never been given a good reason why that has happened. I think this has been a political decision.
You wouldn't see them cut that short, and you definitely wouldn't see them outright cancel it if there wasn't something that they didn't want us to know. You know, you can look at the science yourself. You can look at the history of these mines yourself. You can look at every collapsed dam, every tailings facility that failed, and you can say, is this the kind of risk we want to take on right upstream of America's most visited wilderness?
You may have not been to the Boundary Waters, but you might have gone to Yellowstone National Park. You might have gone to Yosemite. You might have gone to Zion. You might have gone to the Shenandoahs. Imagine the place you've gone to that you cherish, that you love, that you want to be there for yourself, for your kids and your grandkids. Imagine that being damaged or destroyed. That's why you should care about what we're trying to do with the Boundary Waters.
You get tired of talking about it because it's painful.
It's where I feel at home, it's where I'm comfortable. I can't talk.
It breaks my heart. There are very few sacred places left in this world that bring what this place does.
A few years ago, my wife had breast cancer. And they said, well, don't worry, we can just do this little lumpectomy and it'll be fine and everything will be great. And I asked the doctor, I said, so how do you know you're getting the cancer? And she said, well, if we don't get it all, then we go back in and take some more out. I said, well, you're guessing. You don't really know. You can't really see the cancer. And she said, well, yeah, I guess you're right. We have that situation now right here with the Boundary Waters. We know that there is this cancer that will happen if we mine, but we're guessing that somehow we can fix it. I don't know. That's kind of a big guess. And since we have the science to know that this is a bad idea, maybe we shouldn't do it.
This really speaks to every place in the country that is an important and precious wild place. If we can't protect the Boundary Waters from a Chilean mining company, we can't protect anything in this country.
This particular fight to protect the Boundary Waters is a precedent setter. Not only of if we fail, we don't get it back, and a lot of our natural resources, national heritage, a lot of our protected places are at risk. But if we stop it, we set an equally important precedent of our ability to actually protect our pristine and untouched places, of which there aren't many left.
These places are not replaceable. We have to develop the political will to decide that we simply are not going to allow places like this to be harmed irreparably in the search of short-term profit.
We don't have to mine everywhere that minerals exist. Great thing about this republic is we get to make decisions about that. We have a power of our voice, and we need to have our voices heard.
Speak very loudly for this quiet place and spread the word. Take this back to wherever you live in the world and talk about it and educate people on why we need to preserve these wild places and preserve our most precious resource, the fresh, clean water.
I think people feel like they can't do anything about it, that even if they tried, it wouldn't matter. What's crucial and most vital to remember about this fight to save the Boundary Waters is that it affects those 7 generations down the line. It is something that, in reality, has farther reaching repercussions than I think we're even able to be aware of.
Industrialization will change this place, change this town, change our wilderness. We have a choice here in the Boundary Waters. We can save this one.
This is it, folks. This is your chance to have your voice heard in democracy, not only for yourself, but for future generations. We together can make the difference in protecting these public lands.
Do what you can. Keep talking to the legislators, write your letters, send your emails, tell your friends, and don't give up. And don't give up.
It's so obvious that you should not be putting a mine in this location. And we have the means available to make sure that we don't make a huge mistake, that we don't allow a copper mining district on the edge of the Boundary Waters. We know we can do that. We know we can accomplish that. And we know it's the right thing to do. So why wouldn't we do it?